Alrighty, let's talk about some movies, shall we? Hey, what's up you guys, it's Jake here. Hope everybody's having an amazing day out there today. So, I did a thing. And this was a thing that I didn't expect to do anytime soon. But it just kind of came about. And yeah, so you know the title, but I watched through the entire MCU again. All 20 movies. Now, why did I do this? Well, a few reasons. One, it's been a while since I've watched a lot of them. With the exception of like 5 movies in the MCU, I hadn't really seen the other ones in a while, so like all of these were like thrown in the back burner, and then all my mind was just like, Infinity War! So that was one reason why. Another reason why is I had heard of a lot of various opinions on movies that I loved or movies that I hated. I heard some things that were like redeeming of movies that I didn't like in the MCU, and I heard things that people really hated about movies that I loved in the MCU, and I was just like, I'm not really sure where I stand in this, so I want to watch these all again, take it in as a full story, and try and get a new perspective on things, if my mind's changed on any of it. Another thing is because, like I said, a lot of the story elements had kind of been thrown in the back burner, and I wanted to, remember things like little details and parts of the story and character arcs and stuff like that, and I also wanted to see if I could catch anything new within the story, and I did find some things, and I found some things that I've really enjoyed a lot more, and I also found some things that I didn't really like as much. But that was inevitable, and it was just part of this process of rewatching through everything. The final reason I decided to rewatch all these because I like most of them. There are a couple that I don't like, and we'll get to those pretty soon, but besides those few, I really, really like these movies. I love what Kevin Feige has done, building this universe that is completely unprecedented, spanning over 20 movies and dozens of characters that are interesting, developed for the most part, and are made really, really well, have great quality to them. So we're going to get into ranking all these bad boys. My process in this was watching them all in the order that they came out, in the order that Marvel gave them to us. So, diving right in, let's just start ranking them, starting with number 20.
Hey, what's up, random person watching this video right now? This is Jake from the future, who's currently editing this video, and I just wanted to apologize for all the autofocus you're going to be seeing in this video. It's disgusting, and I wish that there was something that I could do about it, but on video mode of my camera, there's not a whole lot I can do. So I tried my best to cover it up or edit it out, but it's still atrocious, so I'm sorry again. I hope it's not too much of a bother, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video.
I absolutely hate this movie. I do. There's nothing interesting about it, really, other than the fact that it sets off the ether, which is played later in Infinity War, but even in Infinity War, it's not really that important. The characters are atrociously uninteresting in this movie. The romance is terrible and not realistic at all. The jokes are not funny. Malekith is the worst villain in the MCU. I hate this movie. It sucks. I don't think I'm ever going to watch this movie again. Iron Man 2. I hate this movie a little less than Thor the Dark World. Look, this movie is so bad, and I understand why some people like it, but it's not interesting at all to me. Justin Hammer and Whiplash are two of the worst characters in the whole MCU. It basically destroys the character arc that they started with Iron Man in Iron Man, and I love the character arc in Iron Man, and the fact that they kind of just start over is just stupid to me. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't make sense. There's also a lot of talking and policy and stuff like that, and it's just not enough action to keep me interested in the story. There are a couple action moments, like the final battle and the race sequence, but other than that, there's not much action to go around here, so it just didn't keep me interested. Alright. Before you start going off on me, Jake hates Captain America. I don't. This is not a terrible movie by any means. just for me, it just wasn't enough to bring anything substantially to the MCU that would last with me. This movie also kind of exists just to set up the Tesseract and its importance throughout the MCU, and other than that, I can't really find anything why it's important besides Captain America himself and the role he plays in the MCU. And in terms of the big picture, I think it's a decent movie, but in terms of it being a standalone movie by itself, I don't know. It's too much of a setup for other things for it to be interesting enough as a standalone. Like, there's interesting elements, and it's a fun movie for sure. There just wasn't enough in that movie to carry its own substantially. One of the things I love about the original Iron Man is that even if Iron Man didn't do well, like at the box office, to carry on this whole universe, it still was a great standalone movie. It didn't feel like it was setting up a bunch of stuff except for that end credit scene. It was just perfect as a standalone. And there's plenty of other movies throughout the MCU that do that well. Captain America, it's okay. Alright, Incredible Hulk. Before I watched this as part of my rewatch, I had not watched this in like 6 years, and honestly, I'm really glad that I watched it again. I supremely underrated this movie. It is a lot of fun. The action's great. Edward Norton does a fantastic job as Bruce Banner, and I think I prefer his Bruce Banner at times. I still think Mark Ruffalo does a better job as Hulk, and in some cases as Bruce Banner. But Edward Norton does great. Liv Tyler is great. Everybody really does a great job in this movie. There's just a lot of script issues, some story issues, but the action's great. It's a really fun movie, and that's why it's really low on my list. There's just not a lot story-wise, and it doesn't really play into the whole MCU as much. It's just Hulk's backstory that you really need to know for the rest of the movies, but besides that, there's not much to it, but it's a fun movie. It's just a good time. If you want to watch a fun Hulk movie, this is going to be the best that you get. Age of Ultron is the next one on my list, and the reason why it's really, really low on this list is because it so often, for me anyways, gets overshadowed by the first one. I absolutely love the first one, and there was just so many things that this one had to live up to for me, and this one didn't meet the first one in any way for me, honestly. Now, not to say that Age of Ultron's terrible. I think it's a really, really fun movie. The Hulkbuster scenes are awesome. I think Ultron is a really interesting villain, even though he's very underused in this movie. The action's a lot of fun. It has that going for it, and there's also some really interesting setups for Civil War played throughout. Like, for the whole Ultron thing, it just kind of sets up that there's a little bit of back and forth going on between these characters, and I really, really enjoyed that. So overall, I think it's a pretty fun time. There's just not enough below the surface to keep me as invested as the other MCU movies that are ahead of it. Thor is another one that I haven't watched in a really, really long time besides this rewatch, and I'm really glad I watched it again because I really enjoy this movie. There's not a whole lot for me to say about this movie because at times it does feel kind of average, but I think Loki's motives as a villain and as a character are fascinating. I love what they do with Loki in this movie, and I really, really like the whole Battle of the Brothers feel of this movie, and how Loki's not as much of a villain as he is just trying to prove himself to his father. I find that really, really fascinating. Overall, this is a fun movie, but like I said about others, there's just not enough below the surface to get it any higher than it is right now. Iron Man 3 is the next one on my list, and I really, really enjoy this movie. Shane Black does a great job writing and directing it. I really, really like Shane Black. I love The Nice Guys. It's my favorite movie of his. And there are a lot of Shane Black isms in this movie that you can definitely feel, and I really, really like that. This movie also explores some really, really fascinating concepts and themes of anxiety and PTSD, and I really wish, honestly, that they explored that a little more within the whole MCU because it's really, really fascinating. I love how Iron Man kind of suffers from the Battle of New York and how that sticks with him and how that keeps popping up in this movie and how it's not just a battle that happened in the past and they mention it sometimes. This is an experience that's stuck with him, and as we see in Infinity War, it really is Thanos getting in his head, and I really find that interesting. It's a really interesting and subtle setup for the future movies to come. I really, really enjoy this movie. Now, I know a lot of people think this movie sucks because of the twist, and I think the twist is funny. I think it's kind of funny, but also I hate Aldrich Killian, so I was just like, oh, come on, really him? But besides that, if it had been somebody else more compelling and more interesting that it switched over to, I think that would have been really, really fascinating and really, really well done. Just, it's really funny, but I hate Aldrich Killian, so I'm kind of iffy on that. So overall, it's a really, really fun movie, really funny, very well written, and has some great action too, and some really interesting themes and setups for future movies. So yeah, overall, I really, really like this movie. Ant-Man is one that I really didn't change my opinion on it. I still think it's a really, really fun movie, very well written. Scott is a really interesting character, and I love his perspective in this movie of how he's just wanting to help and love his daughter and be a good father to her. And I find that really interesting, and the action is really, really, really cool. I still wish Edgar Wright had a chance to direct this movie the way he wanted to, but, I mean, this is still a really fun movie. Yellow Jacket is a terrible villain. I don't think he's that interesting, but other than that, it's a really great movie, and also just sets up the quantum realm really, really well. Overall, really, really fun movie. Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is the next movie that I really, really underrated. I'm a huge fan of the first one, and when I first watched it, it was just really different from the first one, and they kind of caught me off guard, and I think that's why I didn't like it as much, but I really, really liked this movie the second time around. The characters are just given so many more levels by James Gunn. It makes all of them more interesting and more compelling, and that's what a sequel should do. The cinematography and the visual effects are gorgeous. The colors are just vibrant and beautiful in this movie. The action is really great. The comedy and the writing is off the walls, awesome, and just it works so well. I still think Ego is okay as a villain. Definitely not the best the MCU has to offer, but I really, really like this movie. I really underrated it the first time I watched it, and it's really, really great. AntMan and the Wasp is another one that I really underrated the first time I saw it. I think when I saw it in theaters, I was just really still kind of hungover on Infinity War. I had watched that 4 times in theaters, and I loved it, and Ant-Man and the Wasp was just a little underwhelming for me, but rewatching it was just great. I found all of the characters to be interesting. I found the story to be fascinating. I found the writing and comedy to work just as well, if not better than the first one, and the action and the special effects were so much better than the first one in my opinion, and the first one did a really great job at that. I just thought Ant-Man and the Wasp was a lot more interesting and a lot more fun of a movie, and did a lot better controlling the characters and making them more interesting and well developed. So really, really like this movie. It's a lot of fun. Okay, I'm probably going to catch a little bit of heat for this one. Look, I love Civil War, and it's a great movie, but when I was rewatching it, I could not get past how stupid and convenient Zemo's plan is. It's just, I could not get that out of my head watching this movie. I just could not get past that. And yes, everything else in the movie works great. The action, the writing, the characters, the story, you feel where both sides of the argument are coming from. But Zemo's plan just rides on so many things happening that he can't even control, and it's stupid. It's worse than Lex Luthor's plan in Batman vs. Superman, if I'm being totally honest. It's a stupid plan. Also, another thing that I didn't really get is the need for multiple Winter Soldiers, because they bring that up, and when I watched it in theaters, I was like, what? There's more than one Winter Soldier? But when I rewatched it and watched through the entire MCU, I was like, what's the point of that? Like, how does that fit into the grand scale of the story? Because you really only hear about Hydra using one Winter Soldier, and that's Bucky. That's really the only one you hear or even see them using. So I would have liked a little bit more explanation in that sense, but besides those two problems, I think it's a great movie. I think it's a lot of fun. That airport battle is still one of the best action scenes in any superhero movie. It's great. I think this movie is great. It wouldn't be at this spot on the list if it wasn't great. There are just some issues that I can't get past. But still, really, really fun movie. Once again, we have another movie that kinda moved dramatically on my list. I had this as number 1 on my old list, and rewatching it, like, not to say this isn't fun. I love this movie. It's so great. There were just a lot of things that I noticed that were just like, I could have used more explanation. That I don't understand why they don't explain things. So it has a few flaws, and that's why it moved down so much, and I just enjoy all the other movies above it. I just enjoy those more as movies, but this movie's great. The action is awesome. It works really, really well as a political thriller. The introduction of Bucky as Winter Soldier is just fantastic. I really like the whole perspective of Cap just trying to get used to the modern world, because he wakes up like right before the events of Avengers, and so he doesn't really have a whole lot of time to process things in terms of society, and I really liked how this movie dealt with that, like the whole list that he has of things he needs to catch up on. So I really, really liked that. Overall, really, really great movie. Just a couple problems that I picked up on, but still really, really awesome. Thor Ragnarok. This is a movie that has continually climbed up on my rankings the more and more that I've watched it. I love this movie. The comedy, just the more that I watch it and the more I think about it, the comedy just works better every single time. I pick up on new jokes. I remember jokes that I completely forgot about. And it's just a blast of a movie. I still think Hela is not that great of a villain. She feels really shoved in there, like they just needed an excuse to have a villain. But besides that, literally everything works. The action is awesome. The characters are just great. It just takes everything that didn't work about Thor and just throws it away and just completely changes him and makes him so much more interesting and fun to watch. I love the cinematography and the visual effects. It's just such a colorful movie and a great movie to look at. It's fantastic. I really, really love this movie, and I'm going to keep rewatching it, and I'm going to keep loving it more and more. Also, I love Jeff Goldblum. This is another one that really, really moved drastically. I always thought Doctor Strange was good. It wasn't fantastic, but I always thought it was good. But rewatching it, man, I loved this movie. The visual effects and just the whole world it creates with mysticism and magic. It's just awesome. It's so immersive. It gets me so hooked on it. And I think another reason why I really, really loved this movie this time around was remembering that this was the very first movie I saw in IMAX. And so it is really special in that regard, and just that memorable and unique of an experience on the biggest screen you can possibly have was just really, really, really cool. So yeah, I really, really like this movie. Black Panther. I haven't watched this since theaters. I am so glad I watched it again. I have been really, really looking forward to watching it again. And I was once again just so immersed by this movie. The culture that this movie creates really puts you there. It makes you feel like you're there. I got a lot of Lion King vibes again, and I really, really dug that. Killmonger is one of the best villains in the entire MCU. He's just so great. You understand where he's coming from. You don't agree with him, but you understand. And I just really, really like this movie. The characters are just so fascinating. The story is great, the action is awesome, and the culture is just so immersive. I really, really love this movie, and I'm so glad I got to watch it again. Guardians of the Galaxy. I love this movie. Thinking about it, I have very, very minor issues, but honestly, I really can't think of how it could have been made better than it was. James Gunn wrote and directed this perfectly, in my opinion. It's just great. The comedy just works so well. The action is awesome. The characters are given just the amount of depth and that you need to be invested and care about them. It's a great movie. Ronan is an iffy villain, but you kind of understand where he's coming from, him being a radical, and, you know, them, like, his people being tormented and destroyed, and he wants to get revenge for that, and that makes sense. You understand where he comes from, you just don't quite agree with it, but that's kind of how villains work, and how they should work. But yeah, this movie's great. I love it. It just always is such a blast to watch. Oh man, the one that started it all, Iron Man. What can I say about this movie that hasn't been said already? It is the perfect kickstart to the rest of the MCU. It's just a beautiful, beautiful story of riches to rags to riches, and it's absolutely great. The characters are just fascinating, the action is awesome, the cinematography is great, and Jon Favreau just blew it out of the park with this one. This is easily one of the best superhero movies ever made, in my opinion. It's just great, and it being such a great kickstart and setting up something that would be so huge and where it is today is just mind-blowing. Thinking about how it just started from this movie that, honestly, in the grand scheme of it all, it feels kind of small scale, and that's kind of what I really, really like about this movie, is that it feels big and you feel a scale, but also feels small at the same time, and I really, really like that. Okay, can please somebody explain to me how this movie worked so well? Like, I have no idea. There's so many things that the Russo brothers had to juggle around in this movie. They had to juggle around 30, 40 some odd characters, a villain who was beloved by comic book fans. They had to handle bringing 17 previous movies together and have it all make sense and come together in an interesting way. Man, I love this movie. It's great. It is truly a masterpiece in terms of what it was going for and what it did for movies in general. There's never been a movie with this big of a scale. I don't think there ever will be one except for future Avengers movies. Like, it's just unprecedented and unreal how this movie worked so well. And I know you've probably seen it, viewer who I don't know is watching, but that's why I'm not going to talk much about characters and stuff, but it's great, and Thanos is the best villain in the MCU, and one of the best villains ever. Alright, I'm ready, let's move on. Yes, I have Spider-Man Homecoming a lot higher than a lot of people, and I have it higher than Infinity War. What are you gonna do about it? I absolutely love every single thing about this movie. I don't think there is a single part of this movie that I don't like. Just the writing is great, the directing is off the walls fantastic, the action is so fun and awesome to watch, and it brings so many things to Peter Parker and Spider-Man that we had never seen in a Spider-Man movie before, or in a Spider-Man in general. You know, and that's why I love whenever he first puts on his suit and just is going through the city. I love that sequence so much because he's standing on top of a building and he's asked by a guy at a food truck to do a backflip. That's something we'd never see in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man or the Andrew Garfield Spider-Mans. We would never see that. But that's kind of what a high schooler would do. He'd kind of show off for people. He would have fun. He would crack jokes, and things would go wrong. Like when he tries to get the car thief, but he's trying to get into his own car, and people are yelling at him, and the car alarm's going off. That's a really great scene, and I just love that this movie does so much to add to Spider-Man that we had never seen before. The other thing that I absolutely love about this movie is that it maintains its huge scale of being part of the MCU and being right after Civil War and still being like a part of Tony Stark's life and Tony Stark being a part of his life, but also it maintains its small scale. Like, it doesn't feel all the time like a big movie. Like when things that he has to handle, like learning how to tie a tie for a homecoming dance, or going to a decathlon and trying to balance that with being Spider-Man. I just find that so interesting how it is able to handle the small scale feel of high school and being down to earth and real, while also finding a perfect balance with being a part of this huge scale MCU. I just find that really, really great. I thought that balance was perfect. Bravo to Jon Watts, the director of this movie. He knocked it out of the park. I think one of the main reasons why this movie is so high on my list is because of the nostalgia I have for this movie. I watched it in theaters when I was 11 years old, and it was easily one of the best movie theater experiences I've ever had in my entire life, and will always be one of the best. But also just rewatching it again, it's just perfect. Nothing is wrong with that movie that I can see. It's so quotable. The chemistry is great between the character. Joss Whedon just pulls off something that was so unprecedented for its time. Like, think about in 2012, the type of movies that were coming out, and then Avengers happens and brings together 6 huge comic book superstars and balances them all perfectly, makes them have great chemistry together, and pulls off one of the best action scenes, one of the best ensemble movies ever made. It's fantastic. It's so well done. The comedy is great. The action is great. The visual effects are fantastic. I love this movie. I will never not love this movie. It's just fantastic. So that concludes my ranking. I also want to put it up side by side with my old ranking of the MCU. So my old list will be in white, and my new list is in green and red. And red is if it moved down, green is if it moved up, and white is if it stayed in the same spot. So there's an idea of how my rankings changed from old to new due to this rewatch. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it. I really, really liked watching through all these again. It was just a great experience. And now I can finally get to actually watching some movies I've never seen before, because I kind of put that on hold and was just like, I gotta watch these Marvel movies. And it kind of threw off my movie watching, and just in terms of like I wanted to watch a lot of new things that I'd never seen before, but that kind of took over for a while. But now I'm done with it. I can watch new movies. If you want to see reviews for everything that I watch, you can follow me on Stardust and Letterboxd. My tags are right there. They're 2 great movie websites. I've talked about them before, but I put reviews up all the time on Letterboxd. I actually make lists all the time so you can see rankings for movies that I've seen this year, like ahead before I even make my 2018 end of the year video, which I've got plans for that, and I'm really, really excited for that. And I'm going to be watching a lot of new movies now because I'm done with this thing. So be on the lookout on these 2 websites/apps for a lot of more reviews for things that I've never seen before. So yeah, thank you guys again so much for watching this video. I hope you have a fantastic day, and as always, stay groovy, my friends.